Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and I'm here to talk to you today about what I call the forms of rule and the different varieties of rule. Why I'm talking about this is because in order to any understanding of politics, the problem of politics is that there is often a confusion of what politics means. Often, politics is tied to with the concept of power. But the problem here is that this is really confusing. Politics is more about the conception of the way and a particular type of rule is done, how one rules. And ruling, power, the idea of how one has authority or dominion or power over other people, is more general than politics. Thus, to equate politics with power is a distortion of what politics is. Because if we focus on the conception of politics as a form of power relationships, we're not differentiate politics from the other forms of power relationships there are, or the exercising of power. Now, any discussion of power or doing must distinguish between those who have the power and those who don't have the power. And this is understood in terms, from our point of view right here, is the difference between rulers and ruled. Between those who rule and those who are ruled. Those who are in authority and those who are subject to the authority of the ruler. Thus, if we understand this conception, then we can understand the different varieties of rule. Now, for human beings, and the way human evolution occurred, out of man has a certain nature. Human beings have a certain reality. They are biological animals. They're animals. They're mammals. They're primates. They're bipedal. The reality of how offsprings are done makes that their sexual reproduction, that the child has to ingest for so many a period of time in the female of the species, that the child is dependent upon the female for such a long time. All of this shapes the behavior and structures of how the human animal lives. The human animal is also a social animal. That the fact that the child is not simply automatically, once it's born, with a few quick time, able to go out asserts his independence. No, the period of child care is maybe a decade, maybe longer, before children are seen as equals to their parents, to be able to go out and assert their autonomy from their parental authority. Also, the parental relationship of the parents working together for the benefit of their child. Again, this is the first and foremost, as human beings evolve, this relationship is the first structural relationship between parent and child. And that this parent-child relationship is a form of rule. This rule is called paternal rule. This is patriarchy. We get the word from father, patria from Latin. But for the sake of what it is, this is the rule by parents over children. The parents are the ruler, and the children are the ruled. Now, the logic of this rule, and any rule, has a dynamic, and the ruler is who benefits. Who's ruling, and the question of who benefits from the rule. What is the purpose of the rule, and what is the goal, and who benefits from the rule? Now, paternal rule is about child care. It's about the caring of children. And since children in the human animal, the genetic aspect of this, the future of that bonding of husband and wife is seen within the children. And the family is seen as the progression of one generation after another. So therefore, paternal rule is not done for the sake of the parents. It is really done for the sake of the child. The beneficiary of the rule is the child. The child to reach maturity. The child to grow to autonomy. And this becomes a very important understanding of the nature of how parental rule also operates. The nature here is what's very interesting here, that parental rule takes place within the frame of what the Greeks would call the oikos, or the household. And the household thus becomes maybe the first human institution. But there's a problem with the household. It's very limited. Also, the household has multiple. The household is very interesting. The household is not simply the family. It's something more than the family. The household is a construct unit of different relationships that intersect. So first there is not only, and households come to be most likely in its original form when two couples, two different parties, join together to mate. And therefore you have the initial creation of a family. But the creation of the household is taking the family relationship and giving it structure, giving it place, giving it other things. So a household is not merely just the relationship. It is also the relationship plus a way of preserving and maintaining that relationship. It's about means of production, the ways of resource, how to achieve your resources, how do you actualize the means in order to live. So not only the living, but the way of living is combined here. Thus, there's many ways of living. And in fact, Aristotle in his Politics, Book 1, has a very long discussion about the different ways of natural and also unnatural forms of artificial constructs by which human beings achieve in order to live their lives. The natural forms are you hunting, fishing, gathering. The big moment comes where it's a question: is it merely natural or something more? Is with farming. The cultivation of the earth is beyond merely taking what nature provides. It adds something new to it. And thus, farming and cultivation of land alters it. Now, the next, another one therefore there's a connection between the natural. It's not a complete break away from this. Another element that is tied to natural is exchange, trade, commerce. And this is tied to this. The next stage, money making or interest earning and things like this is completely arbitrary. It looks natural in the sense that it looks like sexual reproduction, but it's not based upon this. Now, much of modern technology is not taking what is simply present in nature. Rather, it's taking something from the mind of man and using man's ability to shape nature to create something that man desires or constructs. So therefore, this is something that is not really innate or planned by nature, but man desires and man brings into being by a power over nature. Now, these structure, and why am I talking about this at this moment, is to tie it back to the household. The household has thus this interconnection of different relationships and different ways of life, be it the way of survival of resources or the conception of trade. What's interesting is the management of a household. The word for it is the oikonomikos, where we get the origin of the word economy, economic rule. In fact, the Greeks would think economic rule is household management rule. And what it was understood by the economic activity was commonly done by households or firms in this sense. And thus, a family or a household would engage in commerce and business. And that, now, this leads us to the next problem, the household relationships. There's more than one in the household. There's the parental relationship. But there's also the a marital relationship, the relationship between the marriage partners. This is different. The relationship between the marital partners are very different than the parental relationship, because this is a partnership of equals or relative equals. Although one may have more authority than the other, maybe it's agreed upon or it's a cultural thing over time. But this is a relative rule over equals. Therefore, this kind of rule, a rule over equals, who benefits? Well, they both must benefit. If one benefits at the expense of the other, there's something wrong with this. The next relationship is fraternal. The rules of brothers over each other, and there's a similar. You could argue the similar rule of sisters over each other, but this is not. But Aristotle, when he uses fraternal, he's not really concerned about gender in this case. This fraternal rule is this shared rule of people who are over brothers, brotherly love. They see each other. Again, this is a rule of relative equals, not a rule of difference. The next relationship in here is the rule of servants over servants, or people who are not of the family but live with the family to serve the family. Be they domestic servants and like this, or slaves. You know, in the Greek world, there's no difference between servants and slaves, or serfs or this. Thus, a slave is someone who serves, who's there to serve the household, to serve the interests of the household. So therefore, the Greek word for this form of rule, of despotic, the word despotism emerges. Mastery or the rule over slaves, despotic, despotism. And this actually marries the conception of despotism. Because who rules in this relationship? The master. Who benefits in this relationship? The master or the household. The slave, if he benefits, does not intentionally benefit, he accidentally benefits. So thus, despotic rule is a rule of coercion, whereas all the other rules, except paternal rule, is the rule of is kind of mutual benefit. Paternal rule tends to be a rule of care, a rule of love, where this is what? Giving, where the beneficiary is the subject, not the ruler. Now this gives us a variety. Paternalistic rule, which is beneficial for the subject. It's not necessarily voluntary, it's involuntary. We don't choose our parents. Slavery is involuntary. or maybe given certain postmodern conceptions of S&M that we choose this, usually no rational, sane being would have themselves enslaved to be subject to that. Thus, the benefit of this kind of rule benefits the ruler, not the rule. And hence, this is why despotic rule is not optional in that sense. But the other two of this is a rule of equals. Now this leads us to a very next relationship, economics. Economic trade, commerce. This is a rule of voluntary parties. It's voluntary. It's a exchange of a service, so its duration is very limited. Exchange is such a situation where it's voluntary. And since it's voluntary, if the parties are not benefiting from it, and because since there can be no coercion or force in here, then what happens here is that it can only be, the transaction will only occur when both parties agree. And this leads us to a very problematic situation, because this is, economy is a situation where it's completely voluntary, but actually must mutually benefit all parties. Political rule is different. Political rule is the type of rule which it looks of where it's a rule over equals. It's similar, and therefore it's similar in character both to fraternal rule at one hand, a rule over brothers, an equal rule over brothers, and marital rule on the other. But unlike fraternal rule, but like marital rule, there's kind of voluntary relationships. It's both an involuntary and non-voluntary relationship to it. It is similar in thus both sides. Whereas husband and wife are different. This is a voluntary rule over heterogeneous being difference. Husband and wife are not going to be of the same clan and kin one. Well, brothers are homogeneous, in that they are usually the same blood of the same kin line. Political rule, thus, is both can be both of ruling over homogeneous or heterogeneous bodies, but the concept of who benefits must be common benefit, that both must benefit. But how does politics differ from economics? Easy. Politics involves some coercion. Politics sometimes will require there be some coercion. And I will talk about this in another video. Thank you very much.